The dark side of the Force was not meant to be gentle. It was hunger given form, ambition crystallized into power, the raw expression of domination over reality itself. For decades, Emperor Palpatine had bent the galaxy to his will through this ancient energy, reshaping civilization according to his vision of absolute order. In his throne room atop the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, surrounded by the trappings of ultimate authority, the Emperor performed rituals that would have driven lesser beings to madness, rituals that reached into the fabric of space and time itself, seeking to extend his power beyond mere physical existence. He did not know that something was reaching back. The ritual chamber pulsed with crimson energy as Palpatine chanted in the ancient tongue of the Sith, his gnarled hands weaving patterns through the air that left trails of darkness. Around him, the Force itself seemed to scream. A sound felt rather than heard, the universe protesting against the violation of its natural laws. This was forbidden knowledge, techniques that even the ancient Sith lords had feared to employ. But Palpatine feared nothing. He was the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith planning, the architect of the Jedi's destruction, the absolute ruler of a galaxy. The dimensional barrier, already weakened by decades of Darkseid manipulation and the genocide of Force sensitives across the galaxy, finally tore. Reality split open with a sound like thunder forged from screams. A perfect square of crackling energy materialized in the center of the throne room, not the elegant shimmer of a hyperspace window, but something older, more primal, more wrong. Through that portal stepped a figure that made the shadows themselves recoil. Darkseid stood 9 feet tall, his form carved from living stone the color of ash and blood. Eyes that burned with Omega energy surveyed the throne room with the casual contempt of a god examining an insect's nest. He wore no armor because his flesh was harder than any metal, bore no weapons because his very existence was violence incarnate. The new god of Apokolips, Lord of Tyranny, seeker of the anti-life equation, had crossed the dimensional threshold into a universe unprepared for his presence. Behind him, the boom tube crackled with barely contained power, and through it came sounds that chilled even the elite Red Guard stationed throughout the palace. The screaming of parademons, the industrial thunder of Apokolips's war machines, the promise of conquest measured in planetary scales. This galaxy has a ruler. Darkseid's voice was the grinding of continental plates, absolute certainty given sound. It is inadequate. Emperor Palpatine's yellow eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine surprise he'd experienced in decades. His Force senses, usually so precise they could predict galactic events years in advance, had given him no warning of this intrusion. This being before him registered strangely in the Force, not absent like the Yuuzhan Vong from Wild Space Legends, but wrong, as if reality itself couldn't quite decide whether he should exist. "You dare enter my sanctum uninvited?" Palpatine's voice was soft, dangerous, the tone he used before destroying those who'd forgotten their place. "I am Emperor of this galaxy, master of the dark side, heir to power your universe has never imagined. Kneel, creature, or learn the price of insolence." Darkseid's response was immediate and terrible. His eyes flared red, and twin beams of Omega energy lanced across the throne room. Not mere heat, but the fundamental erasure of existence itself. Energy that could disintegrate matter, bend through dimensions, track targets across space and time. The beams carved through the air in zigzagging patterns no living being could dodge, seeking Palpatine with malevolent intelligence. The Emperor moved with speed that belied his aged appearance, his body enhanced by decades of Darkseid mastery. He threw up his hands, and purple-black lightning erupted from his fingertips. Not the parlor trick Force lightning he'd used on the rebel pilot Skywalker, but the full manifestation of Sith sorcery accumulated over 1,000 years of dark knowledge. The Omega beams met Force lightning in a collision that shattered every window in the throne room and sent the Red Guard flying like rag dolls. "Interesting," Darkseid observed, his Omega beams continuing their assault. You possess energy manipulation capabilities, primitive, but focused. This universe may have potential after all." Palpatine snarled, pouring more power into his attack. The Darkseid responded to his call, flooding through him in waves that would have consumed anyone less disciplined. The throne room became a maelstrom of competing energies, crimson Sith lightning that represented domination through the Force, and the Omega effect that was the fundamental expression of Darkseid's divine tyranny. The two energies were incompatible. Where they met, reality itself seemed to tear, creating momentary rifts through which both combatants glimpsed impossible vistas. The hellscape of Apokolips with its fire pits and slave factories. The Darkseid vergence on Korriban where ancient Sith spirits howled. The spaces between dimensions where physics became negotiable. Palpatine realized with growing alarm that his lightning, which could reduce Jedi Masters to ash and disable entire starships, was barely holding against this being's assault. The Omega beams pushed forward relentlessly, demonstrating a power that wasn't drawn from any energy source he recognized. Not the Force, not technology, but something intrinsic to the being itself. "You are not of this galaxy," Palpatine gasped, his ancient body straining under the effort of maintaining his defense. "What are you?" "I am inevitable," Darkseid stated, increasing the intensity of his Omega beams. "I am the god of tyranny. Your galaxy will kneel before Darkseid, or it will burn. The choice is irrelevant. The outcome is certain." The Omega beams broke through Palpatine's lightning. The Emperor barely managed to roll aside as the energy carved through his throne, which had stood for 1,000 years, which had witnessed the proclamation of the Empire, which symbolized absolute authority, and reduced it to subatomic particles. Palpatine understood in that moment that he faced something beyond his experience. This was not a powerful Force user he could manipulate, not a rival Sith he could destroy. This was a being whose power operated on fundamentally different principles, a godling from another universe who viewed entire galaxies as territories to be conquered. The Emperor did something he hadn't done since facing Master Yoda decades ago. He retreated. Palpatine's form blurred as he used force speed to exit the throne room through a hidden passage, his mind already racing through possibilities. The palace alarms were screaming now, and he could sense confusion and terror rippling through the Force as his servants struggled to understand what was happening. In the throne room, Darkseid surveyed his conquest of the Emperor's seat of power with satisfaction. The boom tube behind him expanded, and through it came the vanguard of Apokolips, parademons, winged horrors that were once humanoid but had been broken and rebuilt as expendable shock troops. They swarmed into the palace by the dozens, then hundreds, their claws and energy weapons cutting through the red guard like tissue paper. The Imperial Palace's automated defenses activated. Turbo laser turrets emerged from hidden emplacements, their targeting computers identifying the parademons as hostile threats. Heavy blaster fire filled the corridors as stormtrooper detachments rushed to contain the breach. But Apokolips technology had conquered thousands of worlds across multiple dimensions. The parademons adapted within seconds, their armor shrugging off blaster fire that would have vaporized standard infantry. And then, cutting through the chaos like a blade through darkness, came Darth Vader. The Dark Lord of the Sith strode into the throne room, his black armor seeming to absorb the emergency lighting, his mechanical breathing the only sound in a moment of sudden stillness. He had sensed the disturbance through the Force, felt his master's retreat, and come to investigate with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never known defeat. Until he saw Darkseid. Even through the Force, which usually gave Vader insight into all living things, Darkseid was opaque. Not a void like some Force-immune beings, but a presence so overwhelming it seemed to warp the Force around it like a gravitational well-bending space-time. "You serve the inadequate one," Darkseid observed, studying Vader with interest. "Your power is impressive for this universe. Mechanically enhanced, sustained through connection to your ambient energy field. Driven by hatred and loss." He smiled, an expression that held no warmth, only the satisfaction of a predator identifying potential prey. You will serve me, or you will be destroyed. Choose. Vader's response was immediate. His lightsaber ignited with its characteristic snap hiss, the crimson blade casting red shadows across the ruined throne room. I serve only one master, Vader intoned, and you are not him. Then you choose destruction, Darkseid said, almost disappointed. He moved faster than something his size should have been able to move. One moment he stood 10 meters away. The next, his massive hand was wrapped around Vader's throat, lifting the Dark Lord off the ground as if he weighed nothing. Vader's lightsaber struck at Darkseid's arm. The plasma blade that could cut through durasteel and slice through starship hulls, meeting the new god's flesh. The lightsaber cut through approximately 3 millimeters of Darkseid's stone-like skin before it could go no deeper. Darkseid's flesh was dense beyond anything Vader had encountered, reinforced by the fundamental nature of his being as a new god. The blade sizzled against his arm, but failed to sever it. Your weapons are inadequate, Darkseid stated, studying Vader's struggling form with clinical interest. Your armor sustains your broken body through technology, primitive but functional. Your anger gives you strength, yet you've never understood true power. His eyes flared red. Let me enlighten you. Omega beams lanced out at point-blank range, striking Vader's chest plate, the very armor that housed his life support systems. The technology that kept him alive despite his catastrophic injuries on Mustafar. The Omega energy didn't simply burn or melt the armor. It began to erase it, disintegrating the durasteel at a molecular level. Vader felt true fear for the first time since his transformation. He reached out with the Force, channeling every ounce of Darkseid power he could muster, and pushed. The telekinetic wave was strong enough to have crushed AT-ATs, powerful enough to have thrown starfighters across hangars. It struck Darkseid with the force of a tactical nuke. The new god stumbled backward 3 steps, just 3 steps, but it was enough. Vader dropped to the ground, his damaged armor sparking and failing, his breathing now labored and uneven as compromised systems struggled to keep him alive. He rolled aside as Darkseid advanced again, using Force speed to retreat through the same passage Palpatine had taken moments before. You are stronger than you appear, Darkseid called after him, genuine interest in his voice now. When next we meet, you will serve me willingly. They all do, eventually. The new god turned his attention to the broader palace. Through the boom tube behind him, more of Apokolips's forces were arriving. Not just parademons now, but also the technology that had conquered countless worlds. Mother boxes, boom tube generators, and weapons designed to crack planetary defenses. Darkseid extended his hand, and one of the mother boxes flew to him, chittering in its electronic language. He interfaced with it, his Omega power flowing through the ancient technology, and began analyzing this new universe. The readouts pleased him. This galaxy was vast, hundreds of billions of stars, countless inhabited worlds, trillions of sentient beings, and it was ruled through a centralized government that had just demonstrated it could be challenged. More importantly, this galaxy possessed something unique, the Force, an energy field that permeated all living things, that could be channeled and manipulated, that responded to will and emotion. Darkseid had spent millennia searching for the anti-life equation, the ultimate expression of control, a mathematical proof that would allow him to dominate the free will of every sentient being in existence. Could this Darkseid be a component of that equation? Could mastery over this energy field be the key he'd been searching for? Interesting, Darkseid mused, his eyes blazing with renewed purpose. This universe will serve Darkseid. And in serving, it will reveal its secrets. Throughout the Imperial Palace, chaos reigned. Stormtroopers fought desperate holding actions against parademon swarms. Imperial officers screamed contradictory orders into comlinks. Senators who'd thought themselves safe in the heart of Imperial power fled through secret passages, suddenly aware that there were threats beyond even the Emperor's wrath. And in his emergency command center deep beneath the palace, Emperor Palpatine sat in darkness, his yellow eyes blazing with fury and, for the first time in decades, uncertainty. The Force swirled around him, responding to his agitation, showing him fragmentary visions of possible futures. In one, Darkseid stood victorious over Coruscant's ruins, his boot upon Palpatine's broken corpse. In another, Palpatine channeled forbidden Sith techniques that consumed him even as they destroyed his enemy. In a third, the two tyrants stood side by side, having forged an alliance that would enshroud the galaxy in darkness beyond anything previously imagined. "Master!" Vader's voice crackled through the comm system, the Dark Lord having reached a secure location. "What is that thing? It resisted my lightsaber. It damaged my armor with energy I've never encountered. The Force, it barely registers its presence. It is a god," Palpatine said softly, the word bitter on his tongue, or something that believes itself to be one. A being from beyond our universe, wielding power that predates the Force itself. He paused, his mind already formulating strategies. "Summon the Moffs, contact the Death Star, activate every asset we possess, and bring me everything we have on ancient Sith techniques for combating entities beyond the Force. If this Darkseid believes he can simply take my empire, he will learn that the Darkseid has ruled this galaxy for good reason." "What are your orders regarding the palace?" Vader asked. "Abandon it," Palpatine said, and even through the comm, Vader could hear the rage in his master's voice. "Let him have his symbolic victory. I built this empire once. I can rebuild its center of power, but this insult will not stand. Before this is over, Darkseid will learn the difference between godhood and true power. The Sith have endured for millennia through cunning and patience. This new god will discover that raw power means nothing against a mind that has orchestrated the fall of an entire galactic order." As stormtroopers evacuated the palace and Apokolips forces established a beachhead in the heart of Imperial Center, the citizens of Coruscant looked up to see something that shattered their certainty in the Empire's absolute power. Parademons filled the skies, their alien forms silhouetted against the city planet's eternal glow. And standing atop the Imperial Palace, visible to billions through holocameras that had suddenly activated across the city, was Darkseid. "People of this galaxy," his voice boomed, transmitted through commandeered communication systems, reaching every corner of Imperial space. "You have lived under tyranny. You have suffered under the rule of a false emperor who claims dominion through fear and manipulation. I am Darkseid. I am the god of tyranny, and I have come to show you the difference between a pretender and the genuine article. Your emperor fled before my power. Your champions fell before my might. Your galaxy now has a choice. Kneel before Darkseid and know order under a true god, or resist and be reduced to ash." His eyes blazed red, and twin omega beams lanced into the sky, a demonstration of power visible across half the planet. "This world is now mine. This galaxy will follow. The age of your empire ends. The age of Apokolips begins." The transmission ended, leaving trillions across the galaxy in stunned silence. The Empire, which had seemed eternal, which had crushed the Jedi Order, which commanded armies and superweapons beyond counting, had been challenged in its very heart by something beyond their comprehension. And in the darkness of space, hidden in the shadows of countless worlds, the Rebel Alliance watched and wondered. Was this threat an opportunity, or a nightmare that made the Empire look gentle by comparison? If you want to see more cosmic powerhouses invade the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see. Challenge the Empire in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Imperial war machine had conquered a galaxy. It had crushed the Republic, exterminated the Jedi, and enforced order across billions of star systems through fear and overwhelming military might. But it had never faced anything like Apokolips. Within 6 hours of Darkseid's transmission, the Empire mobilized. Star destroyers converged on Coruscant from across the core worlds, their wedge-shaped hulls bristling with turbo lasers and ion cannons. AT walkers stomped through the streets of Imperial Center, their commanders receiving orders to retake the palace at any cost. Stormtrooper legions numbering in the millions assembled for what Imperial propaganda was already calling the Reclamation. But Darkseid had not spent millennia conquering worlds without understanding military strategy. The boom tubes didn't close, they expanded. Through portals that violated every known law of physics, Apokolips poured its nightmares into Coruscant. Parademons swarmed by the tens of thousands, their screeching filling the air as they engaged Imperial forces across a 100-kilometer front. But worse than the parademons were the war machines. Hover tanks that projected energy weapons capable of melting durasteel, automated drone fighters that could outmaneuver TIE interceptors, and towering bipedal walkers that made AT-ATs look like children's toys. In the Imperial Command Center beneath what had once been the Senate building, Grand Moff Tarkin studied tactical displays with cold calculation. Around him, officers coordinated fleet movements and ground assaults, their voices tight with stress as reports flooded in. Sector 7 Gamma reports complete loss of the 501st Legion's 3rd Division, an officer reported. Enemy flyers are immune to standard blaster fire. They're recommending heavy repeating cannons and anti-air emplacements. The fleet is in position, sir, another officer announced. Admiral Ozzel requests permission to commence orbital bombardment of the Imperial Palace and surrounding sectors. Denied, Tarkin said sharply. We will not reduce the symbol of Imperial authority to rubble to defeat one invader. Continue ground assault. Deploy the AT-ATs in hammer formation. Concentrate fire on the enemy's dimensional portals. If we can collapse those, we can cut off their reinforcements. Sir, the energy readings from those portals, they're off the scale. We'd need sustained fire from multiple Star Destroyers to... The command center shuddered as something massive impacted nearby. Alarms screamed as structural integrity warnings flashed across displays. Through the Force, Emperor Palpatine, observing from a hidden chamber deeper in the facility, felt the deaths of hundreds of stormtroopers simultaneously as something carved through their positions with contemptuous ease. "Report!" Tarkin demanded. It's him, sir. Darkseid. He's on the ground, engaging our forces directly. Third Army is gone, sir. He walked through them. Their weapons didn't even slow him down." Palpatine rose from his meditation throne, his yellow eyes blazing. "Vader, it is time." In another section of the facility, Darth Vader stood in a medical bay where technicians frantically repaired his damaged armor. The Omega beam exposure had compromised critical systems, and only emergency repairs had kept him functional. Now, as fresh armor plates locked into place and his respirator's rhythm stabilized, he felt his master's summons through the Force. "Your armor is only at 60% integrity, Lord Vader," the chief technician warned. "Another engagement with that entity could be fatal." "I do not fear death," Vader interrupted, his voice a mechanical rasp. "I fear only failure, and the Emperor has commanded." He strode from the medical bay, his black cape billowing behind him, and made his way to the surface through turbo lifts that ascended at maximum speed. As he rose toward the battle, Vader reached out through the Force, trying to sense the being called Darkseid. What he found was disturbing. Where Jedi and Sith left distinct presences in the Force, light and dark, harmonious or chaotic, Darkseid was something else entirely. His presence was like a black hole in the Force, not absent, but so dense with malevolent will that the Force itself seemed to bend around him. Vader had encountered Force-immune beings before, but this was different. This was a will so absolute, so certain of its own supremacy, that reality itself struggled to accommodate it. Vader emerged onto the streets of Imperial Center to find a war zone that defied comprehension. Buildings burned with fire that wouldn't extinguish, some property of Apocalypse weaponry that made standard suppression systems useless. Parademons swooped through smoke-filled air, engaging with TIE fighters in dogfights that left both sides' wreckage scattered across kilometers. And in the distance, walking calmly through concentrated turbo laser fire that would have vaporized armored vehicles, was Darkseid. The new god was alone, having left his forces to establish their beachhead. He moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, his Omega beams lancing out to disintegrate AT-ATs and Star Destroyer point defense turrets with equal ease. Stormtroopers fired on him with everything they had: blaster rifles, thermal detonators, even a suicide assault with an armed speeder bike. Nothing slowed him. Impressive determination, Darkseid observed as he vaporized the speeder bike and its rider with a casual gesture. Your soldiers fight well despite facing inevitable defeat. But determination without power is merely prolonged suffering. Then face one with power. Vader's voice boomed across the battlefield, amplified by the Force to carry over the sounds of war. Darkseid turned, his burning eyes focusing on the Dark Lord. Ah, the cyborg Sith returns. Your armor has been repaired. Insufficient repairs, but functional. Have you reconsidered my offer of service? I serve the Emperor, Vader stated, igniting his lightsaber, and you will fall before the power of the dark side. He attacked with everything he'd learned from decades of combat. Vader was no longer the impetuous Anakin Skywalker who'd lost to Obi-Wan through overconfidence. He was a calculated instrument of destruction who'd hunted and killed dozens of Jedi Masters, who'd crushed rebellions and destroyed armies. His lightsaber technique was flawless gem-so, aggressive, overwhelming, designed to break through any defense through sheer power. Darkseid met his first strike with a raised forearm, and Vader's lightsaber, which cut through nearly any substance in the galaxy, bit into the new god's flesh approximately half-a against muscle and bone that was denser than any normal matter. Interesting weapon, Darkseid said clinically. Contained plasma held in magnetic containment, elegant, insufficient. He backhanded Vader with enough force to send the Sith Lord flying through 3 buildings. Vader used the Force to arrest his momentum, landing in a crouch with his cape settling around him. His chest plate showed new damage, and warning indicators flashed across his helmet's HUD. That single strike had done more damage than most opponents could manage in an entire fight. Vader reached out with the Force and lifted. Not Darkseid directly, which he sensed would be futile, but the rubble surrounding them. Hundreds of tons of debris rose into the air at Vader's command, then hurtled toward Darkseid from every direction simultaneously. It was the same technique he'd used to destroy rebel strongholds, to crush enemies who thought themselves safe behind cover. Darkseid's eyes flared, and Omega beams traced complex patterns through the air, disintegrating the incoming projectiles before they could strike. But while the beams were occupied, Vader closed the distance, using Force speed to move faster than human perception. His lightsaber struck at Darkseid's eyes, one of the few vulnerable points on any being. Darkseid caught the blade between 2 fingers. The lightsaber's plasma edge sizzled against his stone-like flesh, burning but not severing. Darkseid studied the weapon with interest, then channeled Omega energy through his grip directly into the lightsaber's crystal. The blade flickered, destabilized by energy that operated on principles foreign to this universe's physics. Your power comes from without, Darkseid observed, still holding Vader's weapon. Technology sustains your broken body. Your energy sword draws power from a crystalline matrix. Your ambient energy field, this Force, you channel but do not truly understand. You are a tool, Sith, wielded by a master who himself is merely playing with powers beyond his comprehension. Vader released his grip on the lightsaber and thrust both hands forward, channeling the dark side through his rage and pain. Force lightning erupted from his fingertips, not as refined as the Emperor's, but raw and powerful, fueled by decades of hatred and loss. The lightning struck Darkseid full in the chest. The new god's body absorbed the electrical energy, channeling it through his apocalyptian physiology. For a moment, his stone-like skin glowed with the dark purple energy of Vader's attack. Then, Darkseid smiled. Your lightning is similar to my Omega effect, he said. Energy manifestation directed by will. But yours draws from emotion, specifically negative emotion, hatred, pain, anger. These fuel your power. He released Vader's deactivated lightsaber, letting it clatter to the ground. I am beyond emotion. I am purpose. I am tyranny given form. Your lightning cannot harm that which has transcended such mortal concerns. He raised his hand, and telekinetic force, not the Force as Vader knew it, but Darkseid's own matter manipulation abilities, seized the Sith Lord and slammed him into the ground hard enough to crater the Ferricrete. Vader's armor cracked further, and he felt ribs break despite the protection. You fight well for a crippled warrior, Darkseid acknowledged, walking toward Vader's prone form. But you serve a weak master who rules through manipulation rather than manifest power. You know this. In your mechanized heart, you know that Palpatine kept you alive in this inferior armor to limit your potential, to ensure you could never challenge him. He fears what you could become. Vader struggled to rise, using the Force to knit his broken bones and suppress the pain flooding through his nervous system. You know nothing of my master's plans. I know everything about masters and servants, Darkseid interrupted. I have ruled Apokolips for millennia. I have broken gods and enslaved populations across 1,000 worlds, and I recognize in you what I have seen countless times, a powerful being shackled by loyalty to someone who views you as a tool rather than an heir. He extended his hand toward Vader, not in attack, but in offer. Serve me, Vader. Truly serve, not as a limited apprentice, but as a warrior of Apokolips. I will give you new armor, new power, new purpose. Together, we will conquer this galaxy and beyond. The Sith philosophy is merely a shadow of true tyranny. Let me show you the genuine article. For a moment, just a moment. Vader felt temptation. The dark side fed on ambition, on the desire for power, and Darkseid was offering something that Palpatine never would. Treatment as an equal rather than a tool. Through the Force, Vader could sense that Darkseid's offer was genuine in its own way. The new god recognized power and valued those who possessed it. But then Vader remembered Padme, dying because of Palpatine's lies, remembered the Jedi temple burning, younglings slaughtered by his own hand, remembered every choice, every atrocity, every moment of pain that had led him to this mechanical existence. He had given everything to the dark side, had sacrificed his humanity for the promise of power that could prevent loss. Serving Darkseid would make all of that meaningless, would mean that every choice, every sacrifice had been for nothing. I am a Sith, Vader said, rising to his feet through sheer force of will, and the Sith bow to no one. Then the Sith will perish, Darkseid said simply, his eyes beginning to glow. Before the Omega beams could fire, the sky itself seemed to tear open. A massive shape emerged from hyperspace at dangerously low orbit. Too close, too fast, violating every safety regulation that governed capital ship operations near inhabited worlds. The Death Star had arrived. Grand Moff Tarkin stood on the battle station's command bridge, his gaunt face illuminated by the green glow of tactical displays. Through the viewport, he could see Coruscant below, the Imperial Center burning, Apokolips forces establishing positions across the city, and in the tactical overlay, the heat signature that represented Darkseid engaging Darth Vader. Target acquired, the weapons officer reported. Imperial Palace and surrounding sectors. Shall I commence firing sequence? Tarkin's finger hovered over the authorization panel. To fire the Death Star's superlaser at Coruscant would be to admit that the Empire's capital had fallen so far that only planet-killing force could restore it. The political implications would be catastrophic. The practical implications would cost trillions of credits and millions of lives. But the Empire did not negotiate with invaders. Fire! The Death Star's superlaser gathered energy from its hypermatter reactor, channeling power that could crack a planet's core into 8 beams that converged on a single point. The targeting was precise, not the full power blast that would destroy Alderaan, but a focused strike designed to eliminate the Imperial Palace and everything within a 5-kilometer radius. The green beam lanced down from orbit, illuminating half the planet with its terrible light. Darkseid looked up as the Death Star's superlaser struck. For the first time since arriving in this universe, something surprised him. The energy was staggering. Petawatts of focused power, more than enough to shatter any planetary defense, to reduce entire continents to molten slag. It was a weapon designed to kill worlds, and it was being employed against a single target. The new god's eyes blazed red, and he unleashed the Omega effect at full power. The collision was visible from orbit. The Death Star's green superlaser met Darkseid's crimson Omega beams in a contest of fundamental forces. Both energies operated on principles that bent physics. The superlaser channeling hypermatter through exotic particles, the Omega effect drawing on the fundamental authority of a new god over reality itself. For 3 eternal seconds, they were matched. The point of impact became a miniature star, vaporizing everything within kilometers, turning sand to glass and steel to vapor. Vader had barely enough warning through the ounce force to leap clear, using every ounce of his power to force-push himself away from the impact zone. Then Darkseid pushed harder. The Omega effect intensified, channeling more of his godlike power into the beams, slowly, inexorably. The crimson energy began overwhelming the green. The Death Star's superlaser flickered as its power systems strained to maintain output against resistance they'd never been designed to encounter. On the Death Star's bridge, alarms screamed as systems went critical. "Reactor output exceeding maximum safe levels," the chief engineer shouted. "The superlaser is drawing more power than the hypermatter can sustain. We need to shut down or the entire station could—" "Cease fire!" Tarkin commanded, his voice cutting through the panic with iron discipline. "All batteries, target the entity directly. Turbo lasers, ion cannons, point defense systems, everything we have. Sustained barrage." Thousands of weapon batteries opened fire simultaneously. The Death Star, designed to destroy planets, turned its full conventional armament on a single target. The sky above Coruscant became a solid wall of green turbo laser fire and blue ion cannon blasts, more firepower than most planetary invasions would see in their entire campaign, all focused on one being. Darkseid weathered the storm. His body absorbed energy that would have vaporized star destroyers. His stone-like flesh glowed white-hot in places but didn't break. And through it all, his Omega beams continued firing upward, carving lines through the Death Star's hull, finding weak points in its construction, demonstrating that even the Empire's ultimate weapon was vulnerable to focused godlike power. "This is your Empire's might?" Darkseid's voice boomed across all frequencies, transmitted through commandeered communication systems. A battle station that can destroy undefended worlds, impressive engineering. Irrelevant against true power. I have faced planet killers before. I have conquered species who wielded technology that would make your Death Star look primitive. You cannot harm me with weapons. You cannot defeat me with numbers. You will kneel or you will die. These are the only choices you possess. In his hidden chamber, Emperor Palpatine felt the battle through the Force, felt his Empire's greatest weapon being casually resisted by a being from beyond their universe, felt the fear spreading through his officers, the doubt creeping into the minds of even his most loyal servants. If the Death Star couldn't stop Darkseid, what could? The Emperor smiled. "Lord Vader," he transmitted through secure channels, "withdraw. The creature has demonstrated his power. Now I will demonstrate mine." Vader, battered and broken but still functional, retreated from the impact zone as the Death Star ceased fire. The battle for Coruscant paused as both sides reassessed. Apokolips forces had established a significant foothold, but the Empire's military might was barely touched. The Death Star remained operational despite Darkseid's assault. And most importantly, the Emperor himself had yet to enter the battle. "Your battle station is formidable," Darkseid called out, addressing the Death Star directly. "But it pales before the war machines of Apokolips. Before this conflict ends, I will add it to my fleet, another trophy of conquest. Your Emperor has hidden himself away like a coward. Let him emerge, if he dares face a true god." Deep beneath Imperial Center, Palpatine's fingers traced patterns through the air, and the Darkseid responded. He had spent decades studying forbidden Sith techniques, accumulating knowledge that went back to the ancient Sith Empire. Most of it required preparation, ritual, sacrifice. But some techniques could be deployed rapidly when desperation demanded. The Emperor reached through the Force, not at Darkseid. That would be futile. The being resisted such direct manipulation, but at the space around him. The Darkseid was more than telekinesis and lightning. It could warp reality itself, could tear holes in space, could summon energies from dimensions that mortal minds couldn't comprehend. Palpatine had destroyed the Jedi Order not through raw power but through patience and planning. Now he would demonstrate why the Sith, not gods from other universes, had earned the right to rule this galaxy. Around Darkseid, reality began to crack. Not boom tubes. The Emperor couldn't replicate that technology, but something else, something older and far more dangerous. Force storms, tears in space-time itself, began to manifest. They were miniature at first, barely visible, but growing rapidly as Palpatine poured his power into the technique. Darkseid felt the disturbance and turned his attention from the Death Star to this new threat. The Force storms weren't attacking him directly. They were attacking the fabric of space around him, creating pockets of unreality where physics became negotiable, where even a new god's durability might not be enough to protect against fundamental dissolution of existence. "Ah," Darkseid said, genuine interest in his voice for the first time. "Your Emperor reveals himself, not with weapons or soldiers, but with manipulation of reality itself. This dark side of yours has more potential than I initially believed." He raised both hands, and Omega energy radiated outward in a sphere, pushing back against the Force storms. Two forms of reality manipulation clashed. Palpatine's Sith sorcery, drawing on the Darkseid's fundamental corruption of natural order, and Darkseid's Omega effect imposing his divine will on existence itself. The battle for Coruscant had escalated beyond military conflict. This was now a contest between different concepts of power. The Sith's mastery over the Force versus a new god's fundamental authority over reality. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 Rebel Alliance worlds, beings who'd fought the Empire for years watched in stunned silence as two tyrants engaged in a conflict that threatened to tear the Imperial capital apart. "This is our chance," one rebel commander whispered, watching intelligence feeds from Coruscant. "While they're focused on each other, we could strike, or we could all die," another countered. "If either of them wins completely, we'll face a conqueror who defeated the Empire. That might be worse than the Empire itself." The question spreading through the Rebel Alliance, through the criminal underworld, through every being who'd resisted Imperial authority. Was Darkseid's invasion an opportunity, or a threat that made Emperor Palpatine look merciful by comparison? The Force storms raged. For 3 days and nights, Coruscant burned as two absolute powers contested for supremacy. Emperor Palpatine, working from his hidden sanctum, poured a lifetime's accumulated Darkseid knowledge into reality-warping techniques that the ancient Sith had feared to employ. Force storms tore through sections of Imperial Center, creating zones where gravity inverted, where time flowed backward, where the laws of physics became mere suggestions. Entire city blocks vanished into tears in space-time, their inhabitants erased from existence as collateral damage in a conflict between titans. Darkseid stood at the eye of the storm, his Omega effect creating a sphere of imposed order around him. Where Palpatine's Force manipulation introduced chaos and entropy, Darkseid's will demanded absolute structure. The two approaches to tyranny, the Sith's embrace of destructive power versus the new god's insistence on controlled domination, clashed in ways that violated every natural law. And the galaxy watched. Holonet transmissions from Coruscant, impossible to fully suppress despite Imperial attempts, spread across thousands of worlds. Beings saw their Emperor's ultimate weapon, the Force itself, being matched by something from beyond their universe. They saw the Death Star firing repeatedly at a single target without effect. They saw Imperial armies, which had crushed the Republic and exterminated the Jedi, being systematically dismantled by Apokolips war machines. The illusion of Imperial invincibility shattered like transparent steel under a hammer. In the Rebel Alliance's hidden base on Yavin 4, Mon Mothma stood before a holographic display showing Coruscant's devastation. Around her, the Alliance's leadership argued with increasing desperation about their response. "This is our moment," General Dodonna insisted, his tactical mind already calculating strike opportunities. "The Empire's forces are concentrated on Coruscant. Their outer territories are vulnerable. We could liberate a dozen systems before they could respond. And when Darkseid finishes with Palpatine," Mon Mothma countered quietly, "when this new god conquers the Empire and turns his attention to the rest of the galaxy, what then? Do we celebrate replacing one tyrant with something potentially worse?" "We know how to fight the Empire," Princess Leia added, her voice tight with the weight of having watched Alderaan die. "We understand their tactics, their weaknesses. This Darkseid, he destroyed an entire Imperial Army corps. He survived the Death Star's superlaser. What weapons do we have that could even slow something like that?" The room fell silent as the truth settled over them. The Rebel Alliance, which had dedicated itself to overthrowing Imperial tyranny, might face something far more terrible if Darkseid prevailed. "There's another option," said a gravelly voice from the chamber's entrance. All heads turned to see a figure step from the shadows. Human, middle-aged, wearing the insignias of an Imperial officer. Grand Admiral Thrawn stood before the rebellion's leadership, his red eyes gleaming with calculating intelligence, his presence among them so impossible that several rebels reached for weapons. "Peace," Thrawn said, raising empty hands. "I come under flag of truce, with a proposal that benefits us all, or rather, that prevents our mutual extinction." "You're one of the Empire's top commanders," Leia said coldly, her blaster trained on him. "Why would we trust anything you say?" "Because I am also one of the few beings in this galaxy capable of recognizing existential threats when they appear," Thrawn replied calmly. "The Emperor and Darkseid are destroying each other and Coruscant in the process. When their conflict ends, and it will end, the victor will turn to consolidating power across the galaxy. If Palpatine wins, he will be weakened, vulnerable to coordinated assault. If Darkseid wins, he will command both Apokolips technology and whatever remains of Imperial infrastructure. Either outcome presents opportunities and dangers we cannot face separately." "You're proposing an alliance," Mon Mothma said slowly, "between the Rebel Alliance and the Empire." "A temporary cessation of hostilities," Thrawn corrected. "Not alliance, our philosophies are too fundamentally opposed, but a coordinated response to a threat that supersedes our conflict. I have brought technical data on Apokolips war machines, analysis of Darkseid's capabilities, and Imperial military assets that can be deployed independently of the Emperor's direct control. In exchange, I ask only that the rebellion delay planned operations against Imperial targets until the Darkseid situation is resolved." "And we're supposed to believe the Empire would honor such an agreement?" General Dodonna asked skeptically. "The Empire is not monolithic," Thrawn replied. "There are those of us who serve its ideals, order, civilization, stability, rather than merely Palpatine's personal ambitions. If the Emperor falls to Darkseid, those ideals must survive. If Darkseid conquers, nothing survives. Simple calculation suggests cooperation is the rational choice." Before the rebel leadership could respond, the holographic display showing Coruscant flared with new activity. A massive energy signature had emerged from the planet's surface. Not Darkseid's Omega effect or Palpatine's force storms, but something else entirely. On Coruscant, the situation had evolved beyond even Thrawn's projections. Darkseid had grown tired of defensive posturing. For 3 days, he'd weathered Palpatine's assaults while establishing Apokolips infrastructure across the conquered sections of Imperial Center. Boom tube generators now dotted the landscape, creating permanent portals to his homeworld. Parademons had evolved from shock troops to occupation forces, enforcing order with brutal efficiency. And most significantly, Darkseid's Motherbox technology had begun analyzing the Force itself. What the Motherboxes discovered changed everything. Fascinating, Darkseid mused, studying data that flowed through his interface with the ancient technology. Your Force is not merely energy. It is a fundamental property of life in this universe, a field generated by and connecting all living things. The dark side your Emperor manipulates is not separate power, but a philosophical approach to accessing this field through negative emotion and domination. He looked toward the Imperial Palace ruins, his burning eyes seeming to pierce through kilometers of rubble and defensive installations to where Palpatine hid. And if the Force connects all living things, then it can be dominated, controlled, used as a component of the anti-life equation I have sought across dimensions. Darkseid raised both hands, and Omega energy radiated outward in an expanding sphere. But this was not an attack. This was an attempt at something far more ambitious, using his godlike will to seize control of the dark side itself, to impose his absolute authority over the very energy that Palpatine had spent decades mastering. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every Darkseid user in the galaxy felt it, a pressure against their connection to the Force, an alien will attempting to subsume their power into something larger. Inquisitors collapsed mid-mission, their minds reeling from the assault. Darkseid cultists on 100 worlds screamed as their careful accumulations of power were suddenly contested by something that operated on principles beyond their understanding. And Emperor Palpatine felt his connection to the dark side, the foundation of his power, the source of his authority, the energy he'd mastered over 80 years of study, suddenly resisting his control. "No!" The Emperor's shriek echoed through the Force itself. "You dare! You dare attempt to claim what is mine!" Palpatine emerged from his sanctum for the first time since the invasion began. He rose through the ruins of Imperial Center on wings of Darkseid energy, his body wrapped in lightning and shadow, his yellow eyes blazing with fury that transcended mere anger. The frail old man facade was gone. This was the Sith Lord who'd orchestrated the fall of a galactic government, who'd corrupted Anakin Skywalker, who'd survived a millennium of Sith plotting to claim ultimate victory. "You are not a god," Palpatine hissed, hovering in the air above Darkseid. "You are merely powerful, power without wisdom, strength without subtlety, force without finesse. I have ruled this galaxy through understanding its fundamental nature. The Force is not a tool to be seized. It is an ocean to be navigated, a storm to be directed. You understand nothing." He thrust both hands forward, and the full measure of his Darkseid mastery manifested. Not mere Force lightning, but something deeper. The Sith technique called Force destruction, channeling Darkseid energy in its purest form, unfiltered by mercy or restraint. It was the power that ancient Sith lords had used to consume entire planets, to drain life from worlds, to impose entropy on reality itself. The attack struck Darkseid with force that vaporized everything within a kilometer radius. When the energy dissipated, Darkseid stood unmarked, his stone-like flesh having absorbed energies that would have disintegrated Star Destroyers. But for the first time since arriving in this universe, he showed something other than contempt. He showed respect. "You are stronger than you appear, Emperor," Darkseid acknowledged. "Your physical form is weak, but your will is formidable. You have shaped this galaxy through manipulation and long-term planning where others would have used direct force. You understand power in ways most beings never comprehend." He stepped forward, his massive form somehow seeming to grow larger, more imposing. But understanding power and possessing it are different things. I am power, not a wielder of it, not a channel for it, but its fundamental embodiment. Your force is impressive. My Omega effect is absolute. Both beings attacked simultaneously. Palpatine channeled every Darkseid technique he'd accumulated. Force storms and force destruction, ancient Sith alchemy and forbidden rituals, drawing not just on his own power but on Darkseid vergences across the galaxy. He pulled energy from Korriban's Sith tombs, from Ziost's corrupted core, from Dromund Kaios's perpetual storms. The Darkseid answered his call because he'd spent a lifetime establishing his authority over it. Darkseid unleashed the full Omega effect, not just his eye-beams, but his complete authority as a new god. Matter manipulation warped the battlefield, telekinetic force crushed buildings into compressed spheres, and Omega energy radiated in all directions, imposing his will on reality itself. He was no longer just fighting Palpatine. He was fighting the concept that this universe could resist his dominion. Their clash created a crater 5 kilometers across. The shock wave flattened everything that remained standing in Imperial Center. The Force itself screamed, and across the galaxy, every Force-sensitive being, Jedi survivors in hiding, Force-sensitive children yet undiscovered, even beings with only latent abilities, felt the disturbance. It was as if the fundamental fabric of the Force was being torn between two incompatible wills. Darth Vader watched from a safe distance, his damaged armor patched and reinforced, his connection to the Force allowing him to perceive the battle in ways normal sensors couldn't. What he witnessed terrified him in ways he hadn't experienced since Mustafar. His master, the being who'd orchestrated the galaxy's fall, was losing. Not quickly, not obviously, but incrementally, as Darkseid's raw power slowly overwhelmed Palpatine's sophisticated technique. The Emperor was brilliant, his mastery of the Darkseid unmatched in a millennium. But Darkseid had been a god for far longer than the Sith had existed, had conquered more worlds than the Empire controlled, had refined tyranny into an art form across countless dimensions. Vader felt the Darkseid itself beginning to falter under the assault, and with it, his own power. His connection to the Force, which had sustained him through impossible injuries, was weakening as Darkseid's will contested Palpatine's authority over the Darkseid itself. For the first time since his transformation, Vader faced a question that terrified him. What would he become if the Darkseid failed? What would sustain his broken body if the Force itself fell under Darkseid's dominion? The answer came from an unexpected source. Through the chaos of battle, through the Force disturbance and reality warping, Vader felt a presence he hadn't encountered in decades, a presence he'd thought long dead, destroyed on Mustafar, along with Anakin Skywalker's body. Padme. Not her actual presence. She was years dead, killed by his own actions. But the memory of her, preserved somehow in the Force, reaching out to him in his moment of greatest need. Her voice echoed through his mind, not with words, but with emotion. Love, regret, hope that even in darkness, redemption remained possible. And with that memory came a realization that shook Vader to his core. Palpatine had lied about more than just her death. He'd lied about the nature of the Darkseid itself. The Emperor had taught that the Darkseid was supreme, that negative emotion was strength, that attachment was weakness. But if that were true, why was Palpatine losing to Darkseid, a being who operated on pure domination without philosophy, without the refined understanding that supposedly made Sith supreme? The answer was obvious once Vader allowed himself to see it. Palpatine's power came not from the Darkseid's supremacy, but from his own cunning and preparation. The Sith philosophy was just a tool, not an absolute truth. And if it was just a tool, then Vader wasn't bound by it, wasn't defined by it, wasn't limited by it. "Lord Vader," came a transmission through his damaged comlink. Grand Admiral Thrawn's voice, calm despite the apocalypse unfolding around them. "I am coordinating with unlikely allies to address the Darkseid situation. Your participation would be valuable, if you can still think independently of your master's commands." Vader looked at the battle raging before him. looked at Palpatine, who'd transformed him from Anakin Skywalker into this mechanical monster. Looked at Darkseid, who represented a tyranny even more absolute than the Empire's, and made a choice that surprised even himself. "What do you propose?" Vader asked. "Something unprecedented," Thrawn replied, "and likely suicidal. But it's the only scenario where anyone survives this conflict. Meet me at the coordinates I'm transmitting, and Lord Vader. When this is over, we will have a reckoning about the future of the Empire. But that is a concern for tomorrow. Today, we prevent either tyrant from achieving total victory." The Battle of Coruscant reached its crescendo as Palpatine and Darkseid's conflict finally exceeded the planet's capacity to contain it. Both beings, pushed to their limits, began preparing for techniques that would determine the outcome once and for all. Palpatine gathered every Darkseid vergence within reach, preparing to channel energies that would consume his physical form but would unleash devastation on a scale unseen since the ancient Sith wars. If he couldn't defeat Darkseid, he would at least ensure the new god gained nothing but ashes. Darkseid opened a boom tube not to Apokolips, but to something far more dangerous: the Source Wall, the boundary of existence itself, where even new gods feared to tread. He intended to channel a fragment of that fundamental energy into his Omega effect, creating a blast that would annihilate not just Palpatine, but potentially the entire planet. Both attacks, if unleashed, would kill trillions and render Coruscant uninhabitable for millennia. Neither would get the chance to fire. From orbit, the Death Star's superlaser charged to full power, not targeting Darkseid or Palpatine, but the space between them. And on the planet's surface, Darth Vader activated a device that Thrawn had provided, a modified interdictor-class generator that would create a gravity well precisely where the two tyrants stood. "This is Grand Moff Tarkin," the Imperial officer's voice broadcast across all channels. "To all forces, Imperial and otherwise, evacuate the impact zone. Commence Operation Final Sanction. May the Force forgive us for what necessity demands." The Death Star fired at the same moment Vader activated the gravity well. The superlaser's planet-killing energy met an artificial gravity well calibrated to collapse inward, creating a miniature singularity. A temporary black hole that would last only seconds, but seconds were enough. Both Palpatine and Darkseid recognized the trap a fraction too late. The singularity's pull affected everything: matter, energy, space, time, and even the Force itself. Their prepared attacks, meant to annihilate each other, instead were drawn into the collapsing point of infinite gravity. Palpatine screamed as his physical form was pulled apart, his Darkseid energy dispersed. He was too skilled to die. His essence fled into the Force, seeking one of the clone bodies he'd prepared for exactly this contingency. But his power was broken, his physical presence destroyed, his empire suddenly leaderless. Darkseid fared better, his new god physiology resistant even to singularity forces. But the combined assault of the Death Star's superlaser, the artificial gravity well, and the backwash from his own prepared attack proved too much even for him. His form destabilized, his connection to this universe severed. The boom tube generators across Coruscant lost cohesion without his power to sustain them. "Impressive," Darkseid's voice echoed as his form began to dissolve. "You sacrificed your own capital, your own emperor, to deny me victory. This galaxy has more cunning than I anticipated." His burning eyes fixed on Vader in the distance. "We will meet again, Sith. This universe has proven worthy of conquest. I will return with the full might of Apokolips. And when I do, you will serve, or you will burn." Then he was gone, pulled back through collapsing boom tubes into his own dimension. The parademons and Apokolips war machines, their connection to Darkseid severed, became inert or self-destructed. The invasion, which had threatened to subsume the galaxy, ended as abruptly as it had begun. But at catastrophic cost. Coruscant lay in ruins. The Imperial Palace was completely destroyed. Millions were dead. The Emperor himself had been forced to abandon his physical form. And across the galaxy, Beings who'd witnessed the battle asked a question that would reshape galactic politics. If it took the Empire's ultimate weapon and the sacrifice of their capital just to drive off one invader, how supreme was Imperial power really? The galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath of gods at war was measured not in military casualties, but in shattered certainties. In the weeks following Darkseid's retreat, the galaxy convulsed with changes that would have been unthinkable before his arrival. The Empire, which had seemed eternal and invincible, now struggled to maintain order across systems where its authority had been irrevocably questioned. Coruscant remained a devastated wasteland, its reconstruction requiring resources that strained even Imperial logistics. And most significantly, Emperor Palpatine had not returned. Officially, the Emperor was in seclusion, recovering from injuries sustained defending the galaxy against an extra-dimensional threat. The Imperial propaganda machine worked overtime to spin the Darkseid invasion as a victory, the alien god driven back, the Empire standing triumphant despite the cost. But across 1,000 worlds, beings who'd watched holonet footage of their Emperor fleeing into the Force while a foreign tyrant stood undefeated knew the truth. Palpatine had been beaten. In his new clone body, younger, stronger, but still requiring weeks of adjustment as his consciousness fully integrated with its host, Palpatine sat in a temporary throne room established on Bis, a hidden Sith world in the deep core. His yellow eyes blazed with fury that had only grown sharper during his forced resurrection. "Report!" he commanded, his voice lacking the aged rasp of his previous body, but carrying the same absolute authority. Grand Moff Tarkin stood before him, his gaunt face showing the strain of maintaining Imperial stability without the Emperor's direct presence. "The situation deteriorates daily, my lord. 17 systems have declared independence since Coruscant fell. The Rebel Alliance has launched coordinated strikes against Imperial facilities on 32 worlds, exploiting our weakened position. And, most concerning," Tarkin paused, choosing his words carefully, "Grand Admiral Thrawn has consolidated control over the 7th Fleet and established what he terms a strategic defense perimeter in the unknown regions. He claims it's to prepare for Darkseid's promised return, but his forces are not responding to Imperial command directives." "Thrawn!" Palpatine hissed the name like a curse. "The one who coordinated with the rebellion during the crisis, who fired the Death Star at me as readily as at Darkseid. You believe he plans rebellion?" "I believe he plans independence," Tarkin corrected. "Thrawn serves the Empire's ideals, not your person, my lord. With your physical absence and the chaos surrounding Coruscant, he's positioned himself as an alternative power center. Several Moffs have quietly shifted their loyalty to his command structure." Palpatine's hands clenched the throne's armrests hard enough to crack the stone. His grand design, 1,000 years of Sith planning culminating in absolute control, was fragmenting because one alien god had demonstrated that his power wasn't as supreme as he'd claimed. The injustice of it burned through him like acid. "And Vader?" the Emperor asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Lord Vader has been difficult to locate," Tarkin admitted. "After the Battle of Coruscant, he disappeared. Intelligence suggests he may be hunting the remaining Inquisitors, though his purposes remain unclear. He has not responded to direct summons." For the first time in decades, Emperor Palpatine felt something approaching fear. Not of Darkseid. The new god was gone, his threat delayed if not eliminated, but fear of what he'd lost. The absolute control that had made him master of the galaxy. His empire was fracturing, his apprentice had gone rogue, and military commanders were establishing independent power bases. "Summon what remains of the Darkseid cults," Palpatine commanded. "Begin preparations for a Force ritual that will consolidate my power and bind the Empire's military to my will. And send a message to Thrawn. When I return to Coruscant, and I will return, any who stood against me will face consequences that make Alderaan's destruction look merciful." But even as he issued commands, Palpatine knew the truth. Darkseid had done more than just invade his capital. The new god had shattered the illusion of imperial invincibility, and illusions once broken couldn't be seamlessly repaired. Darth Vader stood on the bridge of a stolen Imperial Star Destroyer, staring at the viewport as hyperspace streamed past. His breathing, that mechanical rhythm that had defined him for decades, sounded different to his own ears now. Less certain, more questioning. Behind him, an unlikely assembly of beings worked at command stations. Imperial officers who defected after witnessing Palpatine sacrifice Coruscant. Rebel agents who'd been convinced by Thrawn that cooperation was necessary. And even a few of the Inquisitors Vader had hunted. Force sensitives who'd begun questioning their loyalty after feeling the dark side itself contested by Darkseid's will. "We're approaching the coordinates," reported Captain Piet, one of the few Imperial officers Vader had trusted enough to bring into this conspiracy. Thrawn's flagship should be waiting. The Star Destroyer dropped out of hyperspace into a region of space that officially didn't exist on any Imperial charts. Before them hung a fleet that represented something unprecedented. Star Destroyers flying in formation with Mon Calamari cruisers, TIE fighters launching from the same hangars as X-Wings, Imperial and Rebel forces working in concert rather than combat, and at the center of it all, the Chimera. Grand Admiral Thrawn's flagship, its distinctive markings visible even at this distance. "Lord Vader," Thrawn's voice came through the comm system, calm and measured as always. "Welcome to what I've termed the Coalition for Galactic Preservation. An inadequate name, but functional for our purposes. Please dock at Bay 7. We have much to discuss." An hour later, Vader stood in a conference room facing an assembly that would have been impossible to imagine weeks before. Thrawn sat at the head of the table, his red eyes gleaming with calculating intelligence. Mon Mothma represented the Rebel Alliance, her expression carefully neutral despite sitting across from the Empire's most feared enforcer. Admiral Akbar's amphibious features showed barely concealed hostility toward Vader. And scattered throughout were representatives from independent systems, smuggler guilds, and even corporate interests like the banking clan. "We are gathered," Thrawn began without preamble, "because we face a threat that supersedes our political differences. Darkseid promised to return with greater force. The mother box technology he left behind, which our scientists have been studying, suggests his threat was not empty boasting. Apokolips is a civilization that has conquered thousands of worlds across multiple dimensions. When they return, they will bring resources that dwarf even the Empire's military capacity. And you believe we can stop them by holding hands and singing songs of unity?" Admiral Akbar asked sarcastically. "This is the same Empire that destroyed Alderaan, the same forces that hunted the Jedi to extinction. You expect us to trust them now?" "I expect you to prioritize survival," Thrawn replied coolly. "Trust is unnecessary when mutual interest suffices. The Empire cannot defeat Apokolips alone. Palpatine's failure proved that. The Rebel Alliance certainly cannot. But combined, coordinating our resources and intelligence, we have a possibility of mounting effective resistance." "What of the Emperor?" Mon Mothma asked, her diplomatic training keeping her voice level despite the tension. "Even if we coordinate against Darkseid, Palpatine will never accept this coalition. The moment the external threat is addressed, he'll move to crush any collaboration between Empire and Rebellion." All eyes turned to Vader. The Dark Lord stood at the viewport, his reflection visible in the transparisteel, his breathing the only sound in the suddenly silent room. For weeks, since Padmé's memory had touched him during the battle, Vader had been wrestling with questions he'd suppressed for decades. Questions about loyalty, about the dark side, about whether the path he'd chosen was truly the only way forward. Palpatine had lied about Padmé's death, had kept him in inferior armor to limit his potential, had sacrificed the Empire's capital to deny Darkseid victory, caring nothing for the trillions who died. The Emperor wasn't a wise master guiding him toward ultimate power. He was a manipulator who viewed everyone, even his apprentice, as expendable tools. "The Emperor," Vader said slowly, his mechanical voice carrying across the chamber, is the past. He represents a philosophy that Darkseid proved inadequate. The Sith teach that the dark side is supreme, that negative emotion is strength. But Darkseid felt no emotion and wielded power that matched Palpatine's lifetime of accumulated knowledge. This suggests... He paused, the admission difficult even now. This suggests the Sith may be wrong. That power comes not from philosophy, but from will itself. You're suggesting rebellion? Thrawn asked, genuine interest in his tone. Against your own master? I am suggesting necessity, Vader corrected. Palpatine in his current state is a liability. His obsession with absolute control makes him predictable, and predictability is vulnerability. If we are to face Apokolips when they return, we need leadership that prioritizes strategic victory over personal authority. And you believe you can provide such leadership? Mon Mothma asked carefully. Vader turned from the viewport to face the assembly. In that moment, wearing black armor that symbolized decades of atrocity, standing before beings who had every reason to hate him, Darth Vader made a choice that would reshape galactic history. No, he said quietly. I am too compromised by the past, too associated with the Empire's atrocities, too defined by choices that cannot be undone. He looked at Thrawn. But you, Admiral, have demonstrated strategic brilliance without Palpatine's megalomania. You serve order rather than personal ambition. You are what the Empire should have been from the beginning. Thrawn's red eyes widened fractionally, the most surprise Vader had ever seen him display. You're proposing I assume leadership of Imperial forces. That would be treason of the highest order. It would be survival, Vader countered. Palpatine will never compromise with the rebellion, will never coordinate effectively with independent systems, will never prioritize galactic defense over his personal power. I have served him for decades. I know his patterns, his obsessions. He will lead us to destruction fighting Darkseid while simultaneously trying to crush any who question his authority. And what of you? Admiral Akbar asked Vader suspiciously. If Thrawn assumes control of Imperial forces and coordinates with the rebellion, where does that leave the Emperor's enforcer? Vader was silent for a long moment. Then he reached up and, for the first time since Mustafar, removed his helmet. The face beneath was scarred beyond recognition, burns that had never fully healed, cybernetic implants that had replaced destroyed tissue, eyes that held decades of pain and regret. This was Anakin Skywalker's ruin, the physical manifestation of every choice, every atrocity, every moment of weakness that had led to this mechanical existence. It leaves me, Vader said, his voice now unfiltered by vocabulary, hoarse and damaged, trying to prevent others from making my mistakes. I cannot undo what I've done, cannot bring back the Jedi I killed, the worlds I helped subjugate, the innocents who died because I chose power over principle. But I can ensure that my master doesn't sacrifice the galaxy's future for his past grudges. He looked at Mon Mothma directly. I know you have no reason to trust me. I destroyed your rebellion repeatedly. I was complicit in Alderaan's destruction. I hunted Force sensitives across the galaxy. These are facts that cannot be erased. But if you want to survive Darkseid's return, you need every asset available, and I am still the most dangerous warrior this galaxy has produced. The room erupted in argument. Rebel representatives demanded Vader stand trial for war crimes. Imperial officers protested the suggestion of overthrowing the Emperor. Independent system delegates questioned whether any coordination between such incompatible factions could work. Thrawn let them argue for precisely 5 minutes before speaking, his voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. Enough, he said. Emotion is understandable but unproductive. The facts are these. Darkseid will return. When he does, he will bring greater force than before. He is not a being who accepts defeat lightly. Our combined military strength gives us a possibility of mounting effective defense, but only if we can coordinate without internal conflict. Lord Vader's offer, whatever his past crimes, provides 2 critical assets: intelligence on Imperial command structure and personal combat capabilities that may prove essential against Apokolips forces. He looked around the table, his red eyes meeting each delegate's gaze in turn. I propose a temporary alliance under the designation Coalition for Galactic Preservation. All signatories maintain their current governmental structures, but agree to military coordination against the Apokolips threat. Once Darkseid is defeated or contained, we address internal conflicts through negotiation rather than warfare. Terms of surrender or reconciliation can be negotiated at that time, but only after the existential threat is eliminated. And the Emperor, one of the Imperial Moffs asked nervously. Palpatine won't accept this. He'll view it as treason and move to crush any who participate. Then we ensure he lacks the capacity to do so, Thrawn said calmly. The Emperor's clone bodies require time to fully integrate his consciousness. His current form is weakened, his power base unstable. A coordinated strike against his base facility, combined with seizure of key Imperial assets, would leave him isolated and unable to interfere with necessary defensive preparations. You're talking about overthrowing the Emperor, Mon Mothma said, and despite her diplomatic control, there was awe in her voice. The being who orchestrated the fall of the Republic, who destroyed the Jedi Order, who rules through fear and unlimited power. You believe that's possible? With Vader's intelligence and assistance? Thrawn smiled, a rare expression that held no warmth, only calculating certainty. Yes, I believe it is not only possible but necessary. The vote, when it came, was closer than Thrawn had hoped but sufficient. The Coalition for Galactic Preservation was formed, an alliance of former enemies united by the promise that something worse waited in the darkness between dimensions. 3 weeks later, Darth Vader stood before Emperor Palpatine in the throne room on Biss. The Emperor had been forewarned of Vader's approach. His Force senses, even in his weakened state, had felt his apprentice's presence entering the system. But Palpatine believed, as he always had, that Vader's loyalty was absolute, that decades of conditioning, of manipulation, of carefully cultivated dependence could not be overcome. He was wrong. So, Palpatine rasped from his throne, his new body still adapting to his ancient consciousness. My apprentice returns at last. Have you completed your hunt for the traitor Inquisitors? Have you discovered why the rebellion grows bolder despite my clear victory over Darkseid? I have discovered many things, Master, Vader replied, his helmet once again in place, his breathing steady. I have discovered that you lied about Padmé's death, that you kept me in inferior armor not for function but for control, that you view even your most loyal servants as disposable, and most importantly, he ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade casting red shadows across the throne room. I have discovered that power without wisdom is merely the prolonged path to destruction. Palpatine's eyes widened, then blazed with fury. You dare raise your weapon against me? I created you. I gave you purpose when the Jedi abandoned you. I made you strong. You made me a slave, Vader countered, and I finally understand the difference. The Emperor unleashed Force lightning, not the measured strikes he'd used against rebellious Jedi, but the full torrent of Darkseid power accumulated across decades. Lightning that could fry starship systems, that had brought armies to their knees, that represented the ultimate expression of Sith dominance. Vader's lightsaber caught it, absorbed it, redirected it, but not perfectly. His armor was already damaged from the Darkseid encounter, and lightning found its way through cracks in his systems. Pain lanced through his body as electrical current disrupted his life support. But Vader had spent decades living with pain, had learned to channel it, to use it as fuel for his power. The agony only made him stronger. He advanced step by step through the lightning storm, his crimson blade carving through the energy, his will absolute. Palpatine threw everything at him, Force lightning, telekinetic waves, even forbidden Sith techniques that should have reduced Vader to ash. But the Dark Lord pressed forward, driven by something more powerful than the dark side, the memory of who he'd been, the regret for what he'd become, and the determination that his master's tyranny would not consume another generation. "You were to be my heir," Palpatine screamed, his control finally breaking. "You were to help me rule forever. Together, we would have been unstoppable." "No, Master," Vader said quietly, finally reaching the throne. "We would have destroyed each other eventually. That is the Sith way. Apprentice always betraying master, power always consuming those who wield it without restraint. Darkseid proved that there are forces in the universe stronger than our philosophy. It's time for something new." His lightsaber struck. Emperor Palpatine, who'd survived 1,000 years of Sith plotting, who'd destroyed the Jedi Order, who'd ruled the galaxy with absolute authority, died for the second time. And this time, there would be no resurrection. Vader had brought Thrawn's scientists, who sealed the chamber in a force-dampening field that prevented Palpatine's essence from escaping to another clone body. The Emperor's consciousness, denied any vessel to flee to, dissipated into the Force itself, screaming defiance and betrayal, until the very end. Darth Vader stood over his master's corpse, breathing heavily, his damaged armor sparking and failing. And for the first time in decades, he felt something other than anger or pain or hatred. He felt free. "It is done," he transmitted to Thrawn, who waited aboard the Chimera in orbit. "The Emperor is dead. The Empire is yours to reshape." "Not mine alone," Thrawn corrected. "Ours, the Coalition's. This will not be an empire of fear, but a galactic government built on practical necessity. It will not be perfect. Compromise never is, but it will be prepared when Darkseid returns. And return he will, Lord Vader. Return he will." The galaxy that emerged from the chaos of Darkseid's invasion was forever changed. Emperor Palpatine's death created a power vacuum that could have led to galactic civil war, but the looming threat of Apokolips's return forced an unprecedented cooperation between former enemies. The Coalition for Galactic Preservation became the foundation for a new governmental structure, neither empire nor republic, but something that borrowed from both. Centralized military coordination for defense combined with local autonomy for governance. Grand Admiral Thrawn assumed leadership not as emperor but as supreme commander, his tactical genius deployed toward preparing the galaxy for a threat that transcended their traditional conflicts. The Death Star, rather than being used as a terror weapon, was repositioned as a defensive installation, its planet-killing power held in reserve against the day when Apokolips's war machines returned in greater numbers. Mon Mothma and the Rebel Alliance found themselves in the strange position of being partners rather than insurgents. The Coalition incorporated many of their democratic principles while maintaining the military structure necessary for coordinated defense. It was an imperfect compromise that satisfied no one completely, but it worked. Barely. Darth Vader became something unprecedented, a symbol of redemption and a reminder of the cost of unchecked power. He led the Coalition's special forces, his combat abilities deployed against threats too dangerous for standard military response. But he never removed his armor, never pretended that his past could be forgotten. He was a living warning about what beings could become when they chose power over principle, and a hope that even the darkest paths could lead back toward light. Darkseid never returned during the immediate aftermath of his defeat. But the mother box technology he'd left behind, when finally decrypted, revealed disturbing intelligence. Apokolips was assembling an armada, not for simple conquest, but for total annihilation. The new god had been insulted by this galaxy's resistance, and when he returned, it would not be to rule, but to destroy. The Coalition prepared. Every system contributed resources. Old grudges were set aside, not forgotten, but recognized as luxuries they couldn't afford. Jedi survivors emerged from hiding, their abilities necessary for confronting force-manipulating threats. Sith knowledge was studied not for dominion but for defense. Technology advanced as Imperial engineering combined with rebel innovation. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, Beings looked to the stars and wondered. When the god of tyranny returned with his full might, would the unity forged in desperation be enough to save them? The answer remained uncertain. But for the first time since the Empire's rise, the galaxy faced its future not as subjects of tyranny, but as citizens with agency. Not perfect, not idealistic, but practical and determined to survive. Darkseid had sought to conquer the galaxy. Instead, he'd unified it, had demonstrated that the old ways, Sith domination, Imperial fear-based rule, even the Jedi's rigid philosophy, were inadequate against threats that transcended their traditional frameworks. Emperor Palpatine had built an empire on the corpse of the Republic, believing that absolute power wielded by a single being was the only path to order. Darkseid had proven him wrong by demonstrating that even absolute power had limits when facing beings who wielded different forms of ultimate authority. And from those ashes, something new emerged. Not an empire, not a republic, but a coalition, flawed, contentious, held together by necessity rather than ideology, but also flexible, adaptive, and capable of learning from its enemies rather than simply destroying them. Darth Vader stood on the bridge of a star destroyer, looking out at a galaxy he'd helped enslave, now struggling toward something like freedom. His redemption would never be complete. Too many had died by his hand for that. But he could ensure that the next generation didn't repeat his mistakes, could teach them that power without restraint led only to destruction, that strength without wisdom was merely prolonged weakness. And when Darkseid returned, and they all knew he would, the galaxy would face him not as an empire built on fear or a rebellion fighting from desperation, but as a united civilization that had learned the hardest lesson, that sometimes the only way to preserve what you value is to work with those you once considered enemies. The age of Emperor Palpatine had ended. The age of Darkseid's conquest had been delayed. And in the space between, the galaxy had a chance. Slim, desperate, uncertain, but real. To forge something better than what either tyrant had envisioned. The future remained unwritten. But for the first time in decades, it was a future the galaxy's beings would write for themselves, rather than having imposed upon them by gods or emperors who believed themselves beyond mortal limitation. Darkseid would return, but when he did, he would find a galaxy that had learned from his first invasion, that had adapted and evolved, that had proven the one truth both tyrants had failed to understand, that the strongest power in any universe wasn't domination or control, but the will of beings who refused to surrender their freedom, no matter the cost. The challenge had been issued. The galaxy had answered, and the war for its soul had only just begun.